I think that if you can write music that can help to create a richer experience, I think that that's the kind of ultimate example of what it means to be a film composer. Bonjour, partners. It's time to sit down, put in those earbuds so as not to disturb the neighbors, and join us for another episode of Off Book, a podcast where we talk all about Broadway, movies, TV shows, and anything else we want to geek out about. I'm Marc Stoufer III.
And I'm Ashley Szurna. Today we're going to be talking about music at the movies and how it's used, what can it do, and why so many people don't notice it.
Music is in pretty much every single film that you can watch right now. But yeah, most people either never notice it or don't realize how much work went into it. But it's a complicated job to compose for a movie, and there are a lot of components that go into a successful score. For me, being a filmmaker myself, I've tried to notice the scores for movies more often, and it's incredible how many good composers there are. Because with a job that's that hard, it's incredible that many people have been able to do it. My personal favorite has been John Williams. Mm-hmm. What I love about John Williams' music is that he doesn't just write music. He writes these themes that are instantly recognizable and synonymous with the works that he was composing for. Star Wars and Indiana Jones and the first couple of Harry Potter and E.T. and Home Alone and so many more. He writes these themes. If you start playing the Star Wars theme, it evokes all these emotions in you and gets you to think of Star Wars and the first time you saw Star Wars. And the fact that every single time one of his pieces is played, it brings with it this emotion and this feeling of personal experience. And I think that is the kind of the ultimate job of a composer, especially for a film composer that's creating these themes to go along with emotion and experiences that are happening on screen. I think that if you can write music that can not only supplement that, but also help to expand that and help to create a richer experience, I think that that's someone that I look up to in my very, very mediocre film scoring experience. And I think that to me, John Williams is the kind of ultimate example of what it means to be a film composer.
Yeah, John Williams is definitely one of my favorites. I love Star Wars, and his music is just insane, and I love it. But some other film score composers, there we go. What? A couple of my other favorite composers are Hans Zimmer.
Yes.
And Alan Silvestri, yeah, that's his last name. Those are downright my favorites of all movie composers.
Those three seem to be making the rounds of Hollywood. They're all very good at what they do.
They do. And one thing that I love about their music is it's so different yet so similar.
Right.
Like with Hans Zimmer, like each film, the soundtrack is different, the score is different, but it sounds so similar to these other movies. And
exactly.
That's like, oh, if you liked this soundtrack, you might like this one, so check out this movie,
Yeah.
And that's what I love about these composers is they can create such masterpieces, but then make multiple to help fit different movies.
Yeah, they've all kind of created their own unique sound that even though it changes with every film they make, it still sounds, this is a John Williams score, and I can tell. And I don't think that a lot of people can tell why, but I think that a lot of it just has to do with these people know music theory inside and out. And I guarantee you that if you ask any band kid, both of us are band kids, and we both hate music theory. It's awful, but it's also super awesome when you use it right. And I think that if you break down the music that John Williams or Hans Zimmer or Alan Silvestri has written, you notice there's a lot of things that if you use it right can really elevate your score. There's the use of major versus minor. For those of you that don't know, major sounds happy. And minor can sound sadder, darker. I think that I can use, not to bring up the Hamlet film again, but I'm going to bring up the Hamlet film again. The transition from the lyrics for the opening number, Alexander Hamilton, into the lyrics from Satisfied, those two numbers are actually in different keys. And so what the composer for that trailer did is he used what's called a pivot chord, which is where going up the scale, it's in one key, and then the middle note works in either key, and then you go back down, and it's in the second key, and it makes it this really seamless transition.
A lot smarter by being the self-starter.
Then, of course, there's the key signature, which can identify which notes are going to sound flat or sharp, and then there's tempo, which is how fast it is, and there's accidentals, which is where a note is played out of its key on purpose. So if you're playing a note half step lower, and there's the instrumentation, and there's just all of these things that these composers use so well that a lot of people just go, really? Do I really have to be able to identify all of these key signatures? But once you know what it can do, it's your superpower, and you can unlock magical abilities, and yay, music. But that's really what it is.
Yeah, I personally love music in minor. Major, it's good, obviously. Yeah. We play a lot of that in band, but I love the minor keys because they give this sense of depth, this darkness, and I've always liked that about music. I love darker music. And I think I'm personally more drawn to the minor key signatures because it just makes it dark, and I love that about music.
There's so much you can do with the minor key to evoke all these different emotions, whereas with major, obviously you can use it different ways, but the predominant emotion in major music is more of a neutral to happy emotion, whereas the minor key can evoke sadness or anger or just this kind of despair.
Yeah, and one good example that I have is Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata.
Okay, yep.
The Moonlight Sonata creeps me out. There's a lot of scenes that I've watched in movies that are creepy. They're supposed to give this dark feeling. There's one scene from Goosebumps, in the show, and there was a ghost playing the Moonlight Sonata. And same with R.L. Stein's The Haunting Hour. They have a scene with this Bloody Mary person playing the piano in this Moonlight Sonata. And the Moonlight Sonata has always creeped me out because of that minor key. And that's one prime example of the deep, dark parts of the minor key.
Yeah. And now, a message from today's sponsor. Now, I know that the ads the last couple of weeks have been a little strange, but I think we're finally back to a normal ad read.
Oh, good.
Music theory can be complicated, but the folks over at the Other Notes have created something that they think will make it a little bit easier. It can be a lot of work to learn both the major and minor scales. Most people give up after one of them, but that all changes with the mediocre scale. The mediocre scale combines the beginnings of both their major and minor counterparts, but doesn't bother with any of the hard parts at the end. So if you're looking to only kind of know the scales, look no further than the mediocre scale. You know what? Back to the main program. Something that I think can help elevate a film score is the ability to reuse a theme in different contexts and in different ways. Star Wars uses this a lot with the Force theme. They used it a lot in the original trilogy. As Luke was doing different things, they've used it a lot in the most recent trilogy with episodes 7, 8, and 9 as kind of almost the main theme of this trilogy, but repurposing it to sound different ways and bring back that nostalgia and that sense of adventure. The score for Avengers Endgame used it a lot. They would use various portions of the original Avengers theme from the first movie in 2012, and they would create these different sounding pieces. Sometimes it's as part of a full piece, and sometimes it's just a little, riff, for lack of a better term. It's not exactly, but you get the idea. Where you kind of call back to that original movie, and it can evoke pretty much anything if you do it right. It can evoke happiness, it can evoke nostalgia, it can be sadness, it can make you feel tense. And I think that the best composers can do that, can create these themes, first and foremost. But then second of all, they can reuse these to kind of redirect your mind back to other scenes and other movies, and give you this sense of completion or this sense of longing for the rest of the story.
Mm-hmm. Another example of that would be in Harry Potter, with the Harry Potter theme being played at different points. And that, especially for me, I grew up watching Harry Potter and reading the books. And so it gives me, like you said, a sense of nostalgia. it will either make people sad or make people happy or just have this feeling that they don't know how to explain. And I get that a lot with Harry Potter, and I get that a lot with like the Force theme from Star Wars. Like that was just part of my life, and hearing it being played, it just gives me a sense of happiness. And I think that's like very special to a lot of people. And I think having that connected, especially with the sequels of Star Wars, just having that connection back to like the originals is amazing.
Right. And a lot of people have talked about the music in the Star Wars Episode 9 trailer, how it is a remix is definitely not the correct term, but I'm going to use it anyway, of the original Force theme. And it pretty much everybody agrees that it's awesome, but the more astute musicians will note that it doesn't sound exactly like something John Williams would have written, and it isn't. It's based on the original theme that he wrote, but it was arranged by somebody else by modulating the key. I'll probably link a video down below that explains it better, but it is kind of a quote-unquote safe way to do it, and I think that marks another genius of John Williams, and other composers do it as well, where speculating, had John Williams arranged this, he would have combined the music, and he would have really found a way to make it a new piece of music instead of just altering the original one. And I think that's kind of what I was mentioning with Avengers Endgame as well. They didn't just take 4 measures of the original sheet music for the Avengers theme and play it on different instruments. Alan Silvestri found a way to modify it and to break it up and to create these new themes that sometimes you knew were the Avengers theme and sometimes you didn't even recognize it consciously, but you just felt this sense of acknowledgement, and you felt that it was familiar, and so you're feeling the emotions built into it without even necessarily recognizing what's happening behind the scenes or behind the notes or whatever the correct analogy is. Another thing that I think is almost equally important is choosing the sound for that movie. That's something that a lot of non-film music can do, but I think it's very much more important in a film, because you need to create, especially if you're going to make a franchise or a series, you need to create a sound. The sound of Back to the Future is very different than the sound of James Bond, is very different than the sound of Jason Bourne. And I think that all of those movies have a distinctive sound that works very well for them. But if Back to the Future was going to start using music from James Bond, it might be awesome, but it wouldn't feel quite as right. And I think that that's something that's equally as important, to find the sound of your movie and then tailor it to that. Yeah,
like if you were to take Marvel and Star Wars, though it maybe sound cool, a lot of people wouldn't like feel as connected to it as they would if it was just the original soundtrack. Well, me personally, because it's just, you have different experiences with different movies and different franchises that you want them to stay in their own spot, and you want them to be their original selves and not like something else. So I feel that if you were to mix those movies, like it would just not work out. And that's why, like you said, they need to have their own like music, their own soundtracks.
And I think that there's an interesting conversation to be had there, because like you said, it's very important that a movie find its sound and stick to that sound. But I think what's equally as important is that the movies in that series have their own melodic themes. It's not just reusing the same type of music. You find this a lot in the MCU. People tend to criticize the music in Marvel movies because it all sounds kind of the same, which is potentially good, but it also sounds too much the same, so it doesn't sound distinctive. So aside from certain themes like the Captain America theme or the Avengers theme, or even the Iron Man theme, you have these themes, but you also have a lot of music in these movies that isn't as distinctive, that just kind of exists only to pad the scene, to add something in the background. That you just kind of treat like white noise and kind of filter out. And I think that especially for a huge series or universe, that's the term, it's universe, it's a cinematic universe, that's why it's called the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I get movies. I think it's very important to find that sound, but also be able to diversify. And I think you're seeing that more with the sounds of Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok. Those still sound kind of like Marvel movies, but also have their own sound. And so you can listen to the music of Black Panther and listen to the music of Avengers Endgame and listen to the music of Thor Ragnarok, and they all have their own sounds, but all sound vaguely Marvel-ish.
And that's like one thing that I do love about Star Wars is they have each like little section has their own theme. You know, Darth Vader has his own theme. Han and Leia have their own theme. And with that, they do like sounds like Star Warsy. Like it does sound like something that would be in Star Wars, but the Han and Leia theme is completely different than Darth Vader. Like they give off two different vibes, and you like if you heard the Darth Vader theme and the Han and Leia theme, wouldn't even, and if you've never seen like Star Wars, you wouldn't even put them together and be like, oh, this is from the same like universe, you know? And that's one thing that I love about Star Wars is they can give that off. And even with the Force theme, like it's different. And that's why I love John Williams so much.
And it's very important to note that even though we're talking mostly about franchises or series, the same rules apply and the same techniques are carried out to astounding results in movies that aren't part of series. If you listen to the soundtrack of a lot of movies that aren't in a franchise, it has the same challenges to find a distinctive sound that sounds similar to the other movies in its genre almost, because a spy film has a sound in people's minds, so it needs to sound like a spy film, but it can't sound like every other spy film. So I think every film, the composer needs to figure out where is our niche within this genre.
Mm-hmm.
There is little to no audio left in this week's episode. Congrats on making it this far. Also, thank you.
Make sure you come back for next week's episode when we talk about podcast musicals and how Broadway type shows can be put into an audio-only format. See you then.